Hello, welcome to the Point in Time Count training for Austin Travis County. My name is Katie Manganella and I am the chair of the Point in Time Count Planning Committee. We are so excited that you are attending your training today. You have opted to receive an online training instead of an in-person training. But before we get started, please know that you are welcome to attend an in-person training as well if you would like to do that after you have received this online training. You are one of roughly 600 volunteers that will help Austin Travis County to carry out a successful point in time count in January of this year. Before we get started with the training today, I want to just set a couple of instructions for how to navigate this training. If you are watching this training as a video on YouTube, we are going to make references to links for materials, things that you are going to need to review during the training. And you can access those materials in the links that are found in the description below this video. If you're watching this training as a PowerPoint, the links within the PowerPoint itself are active links, and you can click on those links to get to the materials that you will need. The 2018 point in time count will be Saturday morning, January 27th, and it starts bright and early. The first teams hit the streets at 3 a.m., and we will go into more detail around that later in this training. We want to give you a sense of what materials will be covered during today's online training. You can find those things listed here on the agenda. We're going to kick things off by talking about the background of the point in time count and objectives, how data is collected and why it is collected, a little bit about homelessness in Austin and data we have found in past years during the point in time count. And then we'll start into the point in time count logistics: when, where, how, what, the things that you will need to know to feel confident and be successful as a point in time count volunteer. We'll also spend some time going over the different census forms and survey forms that you will use, how to do the count, how to do the count safely, background on outreach and scouting for the count, where you might find people, how to engage with people. We'll go over a couple of frequently asked questions, and we'll give you some next steps. Finally, before we wrap up for the day, we're going to ask that you take a quiz at which you must score a minimum score of 70 to pass and sign the volunteer release form before proceeding. And with that said, I am going to kick this training off to my colleagues, Richard Dodson and Melissa Wheeler, who will take the training from here. See you at the point in time count.
The point in time count, or PID count, is something that is an annual census of the homeless population here in Austin Travis County. Now, numbers from this census are used to contribute to both local and to national data. This is also something that is required by HUD, which is Housing and Urban Development, to count all of our unsheltered and sheltered individuals in Austin that are experiencing homelessness. Across the country, thousands of volunteers survey assigned areas to count and engage people that are experiencing homelessness to gather numbers and demographics around the community. The point in time count is also an opportunity to bring volunteers and our community together to help end homelessness. It's also an opportunity to share resource with people who are unsheltered and potentially service disconnected.
The work of the point in time count is based around teams. As a general volunteer, you will be a member of a team. Team sizes vary quite a bit, but no less than 3. Each team has a team lead. We've already identified over 70 team leads who are out in the community looking for people, looking for campsites, scouting the area, doing outreach. They've received additional training for guiding volunteer teams during the count, as well as doing the search and outreach. On the morning of the count, you can expect to engage and survey people who are experiencing homelessness. We ask that you do this safely. We ask that you do this respectfully. And we need you to make an impact. And this is your opportunity to make an impact as we gather the information that we need to be able to end homelessness.
So you might be wondering, what is the objective of the PID count? One of the main objectives of the PID count is to determine a total number of unsheltered and sheltered individuals who are experiencing homelessness in Austin. It provides quantitative results in homelessness with stratified outcomes by homeless subpopulations. Some of the local subpopulations that we're specifically interested in this year are youth. Some of the other things we do is compare results with previous counts so that we can get information and assess the improvements that we need to make as a community and what kind of services we need to give to people that are experiencing homelessness. The final objective of the PIT count is really to allow us to ask for funding from HUD. In order to ask for funding from HUD, we need to be able to have great data, and this helps us to and allows us to do that.
One of the other goals of the point-in-time count is to learn about the population of people who are unsheltered in Austin and Travis County. So we are required to collect information like how long they've been homeless, their age, other characteristics like race or ethnicity or gender, self-reported disabilities that may be interfering with their ability to maintain housing or employment. Sometimes we ask questions locally. For instance, this year we will probably ask a question about whether or not people were impacted by Hurricane Harvey. These surveys are always anonymous. By default, we are not going to ask information about identifying people. However, if clients wish to identify, they may. At the end of the survey, we will give them the opportunity to decide if they want to give us identifying information or not. And if they do, then we may be able to hook them up to services.
If you haven't worked with people who are experiencing homelessness before, sometimes it's hard to understand the face of homelessness. The most visible faces of homelessness that we see in our community are sometimes the faces we see when we're driving home on our daily commute, but others are less visible, living in camps, cars, and abandoned buildings. From years past, some of the data that we have collected tells us that the largest subpopulations of those experiencing homelessness in Austin are individuals at 81%, most of which are males. African Americans come in at 42% of our population in Austin, and most of those experiencing homelessness fall between 45 and 64 years of age.
The Austin and Travis County community has been doing this unsheltered count and the sheltered count for quite a few years, and as time goes on, we get better and better at being able to do this. That said, there are a number of factors that play into it, and this is always imperfect. We know that if weather can be a factor, it might cause people to be harder to find. They might be willing to pay for a motel room that night and decrease the count. In really good weather, it might increase the count. So there are always imperfections, but we always try to make sure that we gather as much information on as many people as we can possibly find.
For a little bit more information about the data that we collected last year versus the data that we're going to collect this year, and looking back, we were actually able to have a 4.7 decrease from the previous year in persons experiencing homelessness. This is wonderful for us locally, and we're proud of it. We also similarly have been looking at chronic homelessness in Austin, and we're able to see that it went back down by 203 persons from the previous PIT count.
Even though we did see a small increase from 2015 to 2016, the overall trend long-term is downward, which is very encouraging.
If you want more information about this, we actually did a press release at City Hall in 2017 talking about our successes, and there is a link provided on this slide.
So the geographical area that we are responsible for is all of Travis County, all of the city of Austin, including those parts that spill over into Williamson and Hayes, as you can see on this map. The entire county and the entire city are split up into various sections. You'll see that they are largely based on the city council districts or the municipalities that exist in the more rural areas of the county. We have everything from deep urban core downtown Austin all the way out to the Balcones Wildlife Refuge that we need to make sure that we know how many people are experiencing homelessness in each of these sections. And so the downtown sections start at 3 a.m. As we get further out, we'll have shifts that start at 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. to provide more daylight hours in the more rural areas where safety is a factor.
As we've talked about before, as far as the how of logistics of how we do the pit count every year, you're split into teams, no less than a minimum of 3 people per team covering an area. Every team has a team lead that we've explained earlier, has lots of additional training to help with the day of the count. In areas that there are greater numbers of people sleeping unsheltered, more volunteers and more team leads will be covering the area. In our map that we showed you previously, there are going to be a lot more people covering the downtown regions of Austin. The team leads of each team are in direct contact the day of the count with ECHO staff at headquarters. This goes to serve for safety reasons, for coordination reasons, and all different ways that we can make the pit count the best that we can.
Each team will receive a bag, or sometimes more than one bag, depending on the size of the section, containing all the supplies that you need to do a good count. So you'll have copies of all the forms that you need. You'll have resources and materials to distribute to people that you find, including reminder cards, phone numbers. We have bus passes, we have hygiene kits, we may have socks. Everything that we're going to pass out to the people that we're surveying are donated ahead of time to be passed out. We ask that you not bring additional materials or resources or hygiene kits or whatever, because we want to make sure that the experience is the same from one section to another. We did have a situation where people gathered at a section where someone had brought extra things and then went back to be counted again in another section. That's not the kind of thing that we want. We will also have flashlights and clipboards in the bags. We may have hats. This year we'll have buttons that flash to help identify where you are out in the woods. And if you should actually bring another flashlight with you, just in case. We do have flashlights, but they're not necessarily the best flashlights in the world. If you have something better, you're welcome to bring it.
The point in time count has a headquarters. St. Martin's Lutheran Church downtown has been nice enough to host us for many years as our pit count headquarters. The week of the pit count will have multiple in-person trainings that are also located at St. Martin's Lutheran Church. The team leads stop and start here at the headquarters the morning of the count, and data and forms are collected here the day of the count as well. The team leads will come in and give all of your forms that you've collected of the data, and we will ask them questions if need be and get all of that sorted out so that we can collect the best data possible. A little bit more information about headquarters. If you happen to be on one of the teams that is serving the downtown regions, you probably will stop and start at St. Martin's Lutheran Church downtown. However, if you're in the outline sections, there is a very good chance that you will not accompany your team lead back to St. Martin's whenever they are returning to give us their forms. There at headquarters, staff will be on hand to make sure that all of your surveys are transferred to the data team for review. At this time as well, we will ask your team leads any questions that we have about the data that you collected. So make sure and give all of your information to your team leads before they return to headquarters. Staff will also be available to debrief with you about your experience. So you can come and give us great experiences that you had during your pit count, or if you have something that you need to work through that happened during pit count, we're happy to be there and discuss that with you. We also have coffee, donuts, and all of that will be provided there. Either before you leave your team, if you're out in rural sections, or when you're at headquarters, make sure and talk as a team about your surveys and your forms to make sure that all of the information is correct, is easy to read before you leave headquarters or before you turn in your forms to be sent to headquarters. Also, please don't throw any of your surveys away. Even if you think you didn't complete it correctly, or if you have questions about what exactly you needed to do on the survey, don't throw it away. Send it with your team lead or take it to headquarters to us. ECHO will make the final call if something needs to be thrown away in the end.
The real heart of the point in time count, this right here is the most critical part, is the forms that we use to gather the information on the people who are experiencing homelessness. So we have a census form for people that we can talk to and an observation form for people that we can't or who won't talk to us. I also want to point out that these forms can be complicated. If you have any doubts at all, if you have never done the count before, if you feel like you need extra information on how to use these, we highly encourage you to attend one of the in-person trainings, and there will be several in the month of January, right up until the very last night before the count. So again, if you feel like you need additional information on any of these census forms, don't hesitate to sign up for an in-person training. Basically, the census form is the most thorough version of the data that we collect. So when you encounter someone who is sleeping unsheltered, they agree to do the survey, and again, surveys are completely voluntary. You will ask them all of the questions and fill in the answers as the directions on the forms state. If the person is unable to participate, decides they don't want to participate, or you don't have an opportunity to get to them, then you would use the observation form. Part of the reason why we do this is also to make sure we don't duplicate the count. We don't want to count people more than once. The observation forms make this a little tricky, so try to be as detailed as you can when you are making note of demographic information like race or ethnicity to the best of your ability to do so. And when you are making notes on how to distinguish these people from others, please be as detailed as you can on things like physical characteristics, clothing that they're wearing, materials that they have with them, anything of that nature.
As Richard explained earlier, this is the PIT census form. Now, we encourage you highly to pause the video at this point and download and review thoroughly these forms before you continue on with this training. Doing that will help you understand exactly what data is collected so that you can better follow the rest of the training. After you have reviewed this information on the PIT census form, a little bit of overview of what we are collecting. Obviously, we're collecting demographic information about people experiencing homelessness the night of the count. We also are asking questions about their family members. Some of this can be a little tricky on the form as to identifying each individual family member and staying with that list of family members throughout the rest of the form. If you have questions about this form, please make sure and ask before the count. Don't wait until the day of the count to ask your questions. Your team leads should be in touch with you quite a lot before the actual count, and it's important to ask your questions and feel sure about this form before the PIT count itself. A lot of these forms will be provided to you the day of the count, so no need to print these out and bring them yourself. Moving on to the second page of the PIT census form, we see a continuation of demographic questions 1 through 14. In the middle of this page, question 15 and 16 contain information that is very personal in nature. You want to be able to go ahead and read the statement to the folks that you're talking to the night of the count in order to warn them that this is very personal information, this is completely voluntary information, and they can refuse it at any time. Now, number 17 is the only place within our PIT census form where those you are speaking to the night of the count can identify themselves. This might actually help them be connected to services later in the year. Now, it's important to say again that all of this information collected on the PIT census form is totally voluntary. It can be refused and is totally based on self-report, meaning that there's no second guessing their answers to the questions you ask.
As we mentioned earlier, this is the heart and soul of the point-in-time count. So if you have the time, and please do have the time, we have a link to the instructions so that you can download and or review at your leisure to give you step-by-step guidance on how exactly to complete this form. There are a number of situations when you may not be able to do the full census form. For instance, if you have someone who doesn't wake up when you announce yourself, someone who says, no, I absolutely do not want to participate in this, someone who is in a camp or visible to you, but in a place that you don't feel like is safe, you can use the observation form. As we mentioned earlier with the census form, this is another opportunity to pause the video and download either the instructions and the actual observation form to review. You will notice that there is a lot of information that is very similar to the census form, things that are reasonably guessable based strictly on visual inspection of the person that you're dealing with, where they're sleeping, maybe how old they are, maybe what their gender might be, maybe what their race or ethnicity might be, whether or not you think they might be Hispanic or Latino. All of these are going to be the best that you can do, and we understand that this is not something that people are very comfortable doing just by visual inspection, and that's absolutely fine. If you have no way to make any kinds of guess, the thing that's going to end up happening is that we will apply statistical analyses. If you have any kind of visual cues, that's going to be just a shade better than doing a math problem. The other thing that we want to point out on this is the description. So again, like you do on the census form, if you feel like the people that you are dealing with might be part of a household together, that is, if they were to receive housing that they would all go into the same unit, then you can use this form to capture information on all of them. The description area gives you an opportunity to point out distinguishing features. Because we are dealing with a lot of people with sections that are very close to each other, we may very well have more than one team see the same person. And so if we can get information to be able to tell whether or not that this team saw the same person that the other team saw, we can then make sure we have a good count. So the most identifying distinguishable feature is the thing that you want to focus on.
So the day of the count, what will the process actually look like? You're going to be approaching people who are experiencing homelessness. Obviously, you want to keep in mind your own safety and the safety of those that you are counting. One of the things that you want to do every time is to read the consent statement that is at the top of the survey and obtain at least a verbal consent. This is something that you need to pay attention to, and if you feel like the person that you're speaking to is not comfortable, it is perfectly okay to not move on. So when you're completing the survey, don't feel like you have to pressure anyone to complete the survey. If they want to skip a question, that's perfectly fine. Make sure and always thank them for their participation, and give them resource materials that are in your bag if you have them, donations, bus passes, one per person, something to make them feel like they have received something for their time that they've given you. Remember that you're asking them a lot of information on this survey form. We want you to also remember to only count people that you actually see. If you can't see them, we can't verify that they were there.
Imagine you're at home, sleeping, comfortable in your own bed. You're drifting off to sleep. You're having pleasant dreams. Suddenly there is a knock on your window. Or suddenly someone touches you while you're sleeping in your bed. How would you react to that? Yes, you don't want to do that to somebody else. I, personally, I came very close to punching my brother in the face one time. You don't want to put yourself in that position. You don't want to be in that position. So when you are approaching people, you want to make sure that you are respectful of them and their situation. So on the survey, we actually have prompts that you can use. Say hello as you get close. If you're walking through woods, say hello, call out your name. We're with the point in time count quite a bit before you arrive at the camp so that people know that you're coming, they're not surprised, they aren't likely to punch you in the face. So for instance, hello, 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 my name is Katie. I'm a volunteer for the point in time count. I'd like to ask you a few questions if that's okay.
Let's talk a little bit about safety at the point in time count. So it needs to be said that we have never had a significant safety concern the night of the count. In saying that, we always have these results because we are incredibly careful, and we hope to train you to be able to be incredibly careful as well. So some of the things that we do is we always stay in groups of 3 or more. You need to stay within eyesight of your group members. Sometimes you want to venture off on your own. You get an idea that someone might be around a corner. Stay with a group. Don't get away from your group at all. Make sure and wear comfortable and warm clothing. You have no idea what the weather is going to be in Central Texas until the night of the count, so make sure and wear something that is appropriate. You're going to want to bring a backpack and a flashlight, some water, and make sure and fully charge your cell phone before you come to the pit count. Always remain aware of your environment and have an exit route planned at all times. First and foremost, it's important to trust your judgment, trust your gut. If you feel uncomfortable or threatened at all, remove yourself from that situation. Your gut is always right.
We've already noted that we want you to be in groups of 3 at all times, and we're going to note it one more time. We want you to work in teams. Always ask if it is okay to ask questions. As you reviewed on the census form, some of these questions are very personal. And so you always want to make sure that you are giving people a little bit of warning about that and giving them the opportunity to say, no, I'm done. You also want to be respectful of their space. Even if it is a piece of sidewalk in front of a building, that is their space for that time, at that moment. You are encouraged to try to wake people up, but don't touch anyone. Like I said, don't get punched in the face. If someone does not want to participate, you can respect their choice and complete an observation form instead. This also applies in situations where you feel like maybe there is danger, and so you're not going to put yourself into danger. Instead, the observation form can be how you gather information on the people that you have served.
A couple more safety tips for the night of the count. If you happen to encounter dogs in a particularly rugged area, make sure and remain calm. Take cues from the owners if it's possible and if they are with the dogs. But you also don't have to continue further if you're not sure of your safety. If you have an emergency the night of the count, make sure and know that you need to call 911. You also need to inform headquarters if an emergency has happened, and also if your team lead isn't right there with you, make sure and call your team lead and inform them of the situation as well.
Long before you arrive in your section on the morning of the count, your team lead has been doing quite a bit of work ahead of time, knowing the section, doing scouting, looking for campsites, looking for pathways into campsites. It's also important for you to know about these things as well, especially if you are in a situation where you split your group and your team lead goes off in one way and you and 2 other folks go on in another. Sometimes to be able to cover the space in the time allowed, you need to do that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that you know your section and boundaries. Each team will have maps and very detailed maps of exactly what needs to be covered. Maps oftentimes include marks where we have found people in the past. So please feel free to use those. Check on Google Maps yourself, read through and figure out exactly where you need to be going so that if you do ever have to split up, that you can do everything that you need to do. This also becomes very important for deduplication. So if we have 2 teams that are adjacent to each other, crossing over into each other's boundaries, there's a very good chance that they might double count someone, especially if one team actually talks to the person and fills out a census form and the other team just fills out an observation. There's a very good chance we won't be able to tell whether or not those are the same people. So you do want to make sure that you stay within your section. How do I know where to go? Well, your team lead will tell you. You will stay within the boundaries of your maps, but your team lead, as part of the work leading up, will have already figured out the best routes to take, the best order to do things, how exactly to manage the count. Can you tell me where we found people last year? Absolutely. We have this information given to the team leads. We have information from APD, the Parks Department, other people who have found campsites in the past. outreach teams. All of those things are going to play into the information that we have so that you can spend your time as efficiently as possible. And as you notice, we have a link to a Google map. This is the base map that we use for planning the count. It includes links or pins of locations where we have found people in the past. As you'll notice, places where we found people last year do tend to cluster around I-35 and to a certain degree Highway 183. We do want to make sure that we cover the entire county, and we don't want to assume that just because we haven't found anybody in the far northwest corner in the past that we're not going to find anybody again. So we want to make sure that you count your section as thoroughly as possible.
As we've mentioned, your team lead has been doing a lot of outreach and scouting already before the night of the count. However, your team lead might actually reach out to you to do some scouting with them. This might be an opportunity where you could share information of where you might know people are sleeping unsheltered. Maybe you live in this area that you've decided to volunteer for, or you feel particularly connected to this part of Austin. Your team lead needs this information and would very much benefit from that kind of information if you have it. Your team lead and you as well should ask people in your area ahead of time if they are aware of anyone who may be sleeping unsheltered. Sometimes gas stations know this information in the area. In years past when I've done pit count, gas stations proved to be very valuable. Police officers in that area who are in that area at the time of the count are also helpful. There are lots of different people in each of these areas that will help the night of the count as well.
So, where do we look to see if we can find people experiencing homelessness? Well, under bridges is a pretty obvious thought. As you see, we have pictures of what campsites underneath an overpass might look like. But don't forget about smaller bridges. Maybe there is a small creek running through your area and just a tiny little culvert. Someone might be sleeping down there. I actually found a tent pitched underneath a bridge on Palmer Lane. I didn't even realize that was a bridge. This is part of the scouting, part of your outreach, so you want to be aware of these kinds of things ahead of time. But also, as you're out on the count, this is an excellent place to find people experiencing homelessness.
The night of the count, if you happen to see blankets, pillows, or sleeping bags, it is likely that these are signs of life and that someone has stayed there or slept there recently. This is definitely somewhere you want to visit the night of the count.
As you get further away from downtown into suburban and rural areas, you may see pathways leading off the main roads into wooded areas. It can be surprising how big of a camp you can find hidden behind just a few set of trees, not very far from the road. So it may be a well-worn path, it may be grass that has been knocked down somewhat. Some of them might be marked with a sign or a plastic bag tied to a tree, some other note so that they can find in the dark their pathway to their campsite.
On the night of the count, if you find yourself counting in more wooded areas, some of these pictures show a modified area that might have been used for a living or sleeping situation.
And sadly, we have people who have been experiencing homelessness for so long that they have done quite a bit of improvement at their campsites. Pathways, bridges, handrails. They might even have signs that give you instructions on how to announce yourself so that they aren't surprised. If in those situations, please do follow whatever instructions that they give you. Announce yourself ahead of time so that you're not surprising people. And again, be respectful. This is their home.
Here are some frequently asked questions that we've been asked before. What is the time commitment that we're asking you for as a volunteer? The total time commitment for a general volunteer is 5 to 6 hours. The good news is you're completing one of those hours right now on this online training. The night of the count, you might walk and or count people for 4 to 5 hours. Also, who is eligible for to be a volunteer? You have to be at least 18 years of age. You have to be able to walk approximately 2 to 3 miles, especially if you're going to be in the downtown regions. It's important to note that if you wish to volunteer but you're unable to walk, there are opportunities for you at headquarters that are not so physically demanding. So you also have to complete a 1-hour training session, either in person or online. And we also want to make sure that if you have children that need to be supervised the night of the count, you have somebody who is supervising them so that you don't have to bring them along.
So the count takes place across the entire expanse of Travis County and the city of Austin, but any given team will have a limited section that they will need to make sure that they cover. All teams will canvass different sections of the county and the city, and on the day of the count, you will meet with your team leaders who will designate the place to meet. If you're counting downtown, there's a good chance that your team will meet at the St. Martin's headquarters. But for other sections of the city, your team lead will be in contact and let you know where you're all going to get together to begin the count. Do you need a car? No, you don't need a car. Some sections do need to have someone have a car, but if you aren't willing to use yours, that's perfectly fine. If you are willing to use yours, you've probably already mentioned that on your registration form. We've talked a lot about safety measures already. The main thing is to keep safety at the top of your mind at all times. So this training counts as part of our safety measures to make sure that everybody understands what is going to happen, what things will not happen. Safety protocols, coordination with law enforcement, specialized teams and strategies to count specific encampments or high volume areas, flashlights, cell phones, all of these are safety measures to help make sure that you come back in one piece.
As far as next steps on the PIT training, we need you to complete a release form in order to be able to legally do the PIT count with us this year. This will be located on the second part of your Google quiz on the next slide. I'll explain a little bit more about this. So you should be hearing from your team lead soon. If it becomes January 15th and you haven't heard from your team lead, make sure and let Casey Soberone know, who is the Continuum of Care coordinator here at ECHO. Your team lead should be in touch for a lot of different reasons, but mainly to make a strategy and a game plan for the day of the count. If you have any questions or anything has been left unanswered from this training, please contact your team lead, or also you could be in contact with Casey Soberone, who is the ECHO Continuum of Care coordinator, and her contact information is provided below. Now it's time to test your knowledge of all of the information that we've talked about in this training. There is a link to a short Google quiz on this slide. The quiz is mandatory and you must score a 70 or above. After the quiz, there is also a volunteer release that we need for you to do in order to do the point in time count. Once you do all of this information in Google and submit it, you will then be able to view your score. If you haven't made a 70 or higher on your quiz, we need you to submit another response and do the quiz again and the release and send all of that to us. We truly could not do this count without your help.
Thank you for participating in the 2018 Point in Time Count.
Bye.